That's all your house is? It's a place to keep your stuff while you go out and get more stuff. Now, sometimes you've got to move. You got to get a bigger house. Why? Too much stuff. You've got to move all your stuff. And maybe put some of your stuff in storage. Now imagine that. There's a whole industry based on keeping an eye on your stuff.
We all know and love George Carlin's routine about our love affair with stuff. Who doesn't have too much stuff? I'll talk with Mike Nickerson about his more sustainable idea, more fun, less stuff. Next.
Calling. Call a growth buster. Whoa.
Welcome to this edition of the Growth Busters podcast about getting the world into a recovery program from growth addiction. I'm Dave Gardner. I directed the documentary Growth Busters, Hooked on Growth, and I head up the Institute for Advanced Growth Addiction Studies. Learn more about the film and our unsustainable worship of growth everlasting at growthbusters.org. The Growth Busters theme was written and produced by Jake Fader and sung by Carlos Jones. Thanks, guys. A quick announcement for you. Our good friends at the Center for Biological Diversity are teaming up with another good friend, Terry Spar, producer of the documentary 8 Billion Angels, to allow you to see the film at no cost and then join them for a free webinar, Saving Life on Earth. 8 Billion Angels is a fairly new documentary about how population pressure threatens our oceans, rivers, land, and air, and how solutions, including women's empowerment and transitioning away from fossil fuels, might just get us back on track. You can see the film for free between now and June 24th of 2021. The webinar is on June 24th. I'll put a registration link in the show notes. We all know overconsumption by the richest 3 or 4 billion of us is one of the reasons we humans are in overshoot. Funny thing is, all that stuff we're ordering from Amazon is not really the secret to a happy life. The Ronco 6-star 25-piece knife set with free flavor injector won't make us happier. For decades, my guest on the podcast today has been offering common sense about what's really important in life. His book, Life, Money, and Illusion, Living on Earth as If We Want to Stay, was a source of inspiration for me when I was making the Growth Busters documentary. His newest effort is promoting the mantra, more fun, less stuff. I invited Mike Nickerson, founder of the Sustainability Project 7th Generation Initiative, to fill me in.
Some they just want more, but don't know what it's for, but not me. I'm a growth buster.
Mike Nickerson, you've been writing recently about more fun, less stuff. What is up with that?
Well, there's so many of the solutions to the climate crisis and other environmental issues, but the climate's taken over, are we need to, either build huge infrastructure, which is a lot of mining and manufacturing and all that stuff, or cut back, tighten our belt, consume less. Neither one's a really appealing phenomena. Certainly better to build solar, energy systems than to, build nuclear power plants or highways. But when it comes to cutting back, like the things that we can do with life are so rewarding that we could be getting so much satisfaction from living that we don't have time to consume on a dangerous level. So if people could just grasp the future that's possible, if we look at what we can do with our lives and indulge ourselves in life rather than stuff, then we could just drop the human impacts on the planet immensely and have fun doing it.
But wait a minute, I thought that he who dies with the most toys wins.
Yeah, that was the old game. And the new game is he who has the least toys and is still satisfied wins.
Of course. And I think it was in your book, Life, Money, and Illusion, where you first mentioned to me in my life the 3 L's, right?
Learning, love, and laughter.
Yep. Those are pretty low consumption items.
High satisfaction.
High satisfaction and pretty small footprint. So what are we talking about? Because, I think there's an awful lot of people today who are living on the treadmill, in service to the growth economy and just trying to get by. They're plugged into a system that they may not even recognize what this system is doing to them. What are they missing?
Well, their lives are caught up, and if they've gotten into a substantial debt situation, they're prisoners, and they're missing the freedom to enjoy living. Right? It takes so little material stuff to be alive and healthy that one can work, just enough to basically provide for others that are around you, and then get a lot of satisfaction from living. It's just your money or your life. You either chase down having the money and buying what it takes to keep yourself going, or you focus on life, and then you just need enough to make sure you've got adequate food and shelter.
Yeah, they say you can't take it with you. Right. And there's this other old adage that no one on their deathbed ever says, I wish I'd spent more time at the office.
Yeah.
It's usually, I wish I'd spent more time with the people I love.
Indeed.
Fishing, sitting on the porch, reading good books, going for long walks, that kind of thing. But you mentioned debt, and I think that's a pretty important part of it. In fact, whenever I'm speaking to a college campus group, or really pretty much any group, especially young people, though, and they ask, well, what can we do? How can we do our part? Well, one of the things that I like to mention is, don't get trapped. Don't become imprisoned by the system. Stay out of debt, because so many people today who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s have been in this system where you've got fancy cars, you've got a second home to escape the snow or to escape the heat. And you've got all this debt, you've got all these bills to pay where you can't really afford to stop working like a dog.
It's a trap. Yeah, lots of people get trapped. I look at people coming out of university with enormous debts. It's from their student life, and some of them will never get out. And it's a shame, because there's a lot of human potential there. You've probably mentioned in earlier podcasts, but the golden age of Greece started after debts were canceled. They'd gotten so tied up in most people were busy trying to pay off debts that they didn't have a chance to pursue the things that really mattered to them. And this fellow Solon was appointed to straighten this out, and he just forgave all debts of the freemen. They were still slaves, and they didn't have their lives, but the people who'd lost their land in debt to people who had a lot of money, it was returned, and they were able to work on mathematics and architecture and philosophy and astronomy. And the golden age of Greece came because people were freed up from that debt bondage and could pursue the things that were exciting to them. And we could likely do that again. There's an enormous amount of pent-up potential that could be freed if we weren't trying to keep track of the accounting books, and we're more focused on making life work for everybody.
Do you think there's much chance of that happening?
I think it's inevitable by and by. It either happens because we realize that there's a world out there for us, or, the mainstream collapses under its own weight, and the people who dig out from under the rubble will realize that, hey, there's nobody around to charge interest, right? So you go about what you can. It's by far preferable to choose that solution. And there's rumblings, this COVID thing has gotten, some of the steps of taking care of people first to make sure there's not widespread desperation. And people are catching on that, we could run our world that way rather than just maintaining this global monopoly game. I don't know if your listeners are familiar with the fine print and the rules of monopoly, but the game isn't officially over until one person has got all the property. Most people realize at some point who's winning, and they say, okay, enough. You go to the fridge and make a sandwich or something. But in the global game, the winners are having a great time, and they don't recognize that really the game is done, and we need to recognize them, congratulate them, pass out some prizes, pack up the game and play something else. And the game we need to play is sustainability. We're a mature species. We can affect everything on the planet. So we need to, recognize what its limitations are and build our systems to live within that.
Well, I think you're right that there's a little more dialogue about this and a little bit more hope than usual, just because of the things that have been transpiring over the last couple of years. But before we go down some of those rabbit holes, I want to circle back for a minute to more fun, less stuff. You've called it a meme, and it feels to me like you might be trying to see if we can't come up with something positive and correct in our own best interest that could go viral. Is that kind of what you have in mind?
That'd be nice. If we got the 99% and the 1% thing from the efforts of the Occupy movement, and that's clarified it. Like the whole issue of inequality has risen way up in public consciousness because of those memes, right?
Yeah.
So if people could just realize that, we could have more fun if we put up with less stuff, it's catchy enough in its terminology. In English, anyways, I have a French translator, and I haven't heard back whether or not it actually works in that language. But it certainly could spread around in the English speaking world and just give people the idea that we don't have to be chasing the stuff. Like we only need what it takes to be healthy, and that's easy to come by. And then make the most of life.
Yeah. You're Canadian, and I have a lot of respect for Canadians. There are a few areas that I think that you're ahead of us down here in the United States, and I'm reminded of the Work Less Party, that I think the nucleus of that was in Vancouver, wasn't it?
I think so. Yeah, I haven't lost track of it. I haven't heard anything lately.
Yeah, me neither, but it was a really great idea, and it was all about working less. And the truth is, the only way for anywhere close to 7 or 8 or 9 billion people on the planet to live sustainably is for us to cut our consumption. Those of us, the richest half of us, need to really seriously cut our consumption. And the only way that's really going to happen is if we stop working 40, 50, 60 hours a week. We ought to be sharing our job with someone else and, cutting back our expenses and devoting more time to the more fun stuff, right? That doesn't cost a lot of money.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so let's. I'm going to give you a chance to talk about anything and everything that you're doing, and I'd really love to kind of dig back into your history. You've been at this a long time, and you're a beautiful human being, and you've long been a real source of inspiration for me in my work ever since I first read Life, Money, and Illusion back in, I probably read that in 2008 maybe or so. But you've been working on sustainability long before that, and I think you kind of initially stumbled onto that subject, didn't you?
It's true. I got out of high school and I was just sort of coming into my own as a human being. And humans are incredible. We have an amazing ability to sense and understand and to do things. And I was thinking, well, what shall I do, with this capacity that I've got as a human being? And I thought, well, what needs doing? And I got the idea that if I went and I asked people who were working voluntarily or not for profit why they were bothering, it wasn't for the money, that was something that inspired them, that I get an idea of what the real problems were. And I traveled, I hitchhiked across Canada and down the west coast of the U.S., looking up people in citizens groups and asking them, what's moving you? Why are you, what's the problem you're trying to solve? What are the solutions you're coming up with? And I did that for 4 months and then got back to Toronto and got together with some other young people who shared similar, interest in the future. And we set up this Institute for the Study of Cultural Evolution, which was just a flag to wave to say, what's up? What are the problems you see? What can we do about it? And we studied voluntary and nonprofit action, both groups and literature that groups thought was important, and came up, it was 4 years. We wanted to do what's now called an eco-village, but we weren't saving any money. Our peak, we had 20 young people in 3 rented houses, and we were barely paying the rent, so we weren't, saving a lot of money for land. The organization disbanded, and I took all the notes and sort of categorized them into a variety of, the different sorts of things that people were talking about, and wrote a sentence for each one and started showing that around. And somebody looked at it and said, oh, this is the definition of sustainability. This would have been 1974. The word wasn't in circulation then, but it, the ability to sustain it was self-explanatory. And I thought, well, why would a study of voluntary and nonprofit work give you a definition of sustainability? And after some time, I realized that the nonprofit voluntary sector is the natural immune system of society. Wherever there's a problem showing up, people notice. And if they can solve the problem, they do. And if they can't, they talk to their friends, they talk to their family, they form organizations. If they still can't solve it, they start to lobby and, do all the things that voluntary and nonprofit groups do to try to solve the problems, to make the public aware that these are problems and that there's ways of solving them. And that's how, humanity solves the problems that it's got. And we would have resolved all of the problems we've got decades ago if it wasn't for the use of the same media by vested interests to promote the continuation of the things that caused the problems. And of course, they're making lots of money and they can afford lots of airtime to tell you, you need to earn and spend more, right? That's the way to solve our problems, rather than, you need to have more fun and forget about the stuff.
So that was back in '74 when you published, I think you published, kind of the results of that work, and I think you called it Guideposts for a Sustainable Future, right?
That was a video. Actually, it was Change the World, I Want to Stay On, and it came out in 1977.
That's right. Okay, so almost 50 years have gone by, and you've sort of halfway answered my question, but that's long enough. So surely by now, our culture has evolved. You've solved the problem, and we're living sustainably. No?
There you go.
Why not?
In our mind's eye.
And what happened? Was it just the media, or what else is? Have we made any progress? Do you think?
Stuff is so appealing. Like if I offer you yourself, your ability to enjoy a beautiful day, or I offer you a cell phone, like the cell phone glistens and it shines, and it may not be my offering it, but you've seen it on TV, right? It's advertising is $500 million or it's $500 billion. It's an enormous enterprise, and all of it is saying you need things to be happy, right? So it takes examples, and there are many, and they get some following of people who are just enjoying life and getting a lot out of it. But the media is just packed with the materialistic mindset, and the materialist world has been blooming through most of that time and quite appealing. I know intentional communities were quite abundant back in the end of the 1800s, and as the industrial civilization sort of flourished, there was all this stuff to distract people, and shiny things we like. In the 60s we had another 60s and 70s, another wave of intentional communities, but always in the context of a thriving, multiplying materialist culture. Now we're starting to see the damage that culture can do, and as the monopoly game progresses, fewer and fewer people can actually participate to the full. So it's losing its luster, and the possibility of people picking up on real solutions is, hopefully, we'd like to think, expanding again.
So we're in a different place today where maybe we're seeing, or we're about to see, a lot more progress in the evolution of our society in the right direction?
It's getting ripe for change. But hopefully it won't rot.
Yeah. I guess it's going to go one way or the other, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, you can look at the tobacco. I was reading a thing again about how, big tobacco promoted, no, tobacco doesn't cause cancer for years and years and years, in spite of there being all sorts of scientific research that said, yes, there's a direct link. The more you smoke, the more likely you'll get cancer. But they managed to hold that off so they could keep their sales up for decades. Yeah. Right? And those forces are still interested in the consumer world. That's how they keep their ball game going. So, we got to somehow set ourselves apart from the media barrage and really focus on what life offers and encourage others to do that as well.
I really want to encourage people to kind of follow up on many of the things that we talk about in this episode, so I'm just going to promise links in the show notes to just about everything we mentioned, and especially the book that you wrote, Life, Money, and Illusion, that was published in 2006 originally. That's starting to sound like a long time ago, but I want to say I think that's a pretty timeless book, and people can still find it, right?
Yeah, it's available online. It's an ebook. If you want to get it hard copy, you've got to get it from me now. The publishers stopped carrying it. We bought up their stock. So you've got a few. Yeah.
We'll definitely include your website. And so you were hanging out with basically a bunch of crazy hippies, who didn't want to just go to work on Madison Avenue or Wall Street, but I imagine maybe some of your friends eventually gave up and did. I think a lot of the young people who were all about peace and love back in the 60s and 70s ended up kind of jumping on the treadmill with everybody else, but you certainly didn't. You've really kind of dedicated your life to trying to do these good things. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about in your long timeline was you coordinated an initiative to establish a genuine progress index for Canada, because one of the things that is leading us down the garden path to collapse is this worship of gross domestic product and economic growth. So you made some effort in Canada to get the country, right, to have a different gauge on its dashboard.
Indeed, and we were successful in getting a motion passed in the House of Commons that said, in the opinion of the House, the government should establish a set of measures of the social, economic, and environmental well-being of people, communities, and ecosystems in Canada. Trouble is the government didn't. I didn't realize at that time that the House of Commons is not the government. The government is some of the MPs who get together with the Prime Minister and they form the government. And, the House of Commons advises them. And if the government presents a bill, the House of Commons has to pass it. But as far as, stimulating something as far-reaching as a genuine progress index, you'd need to have full cooperation. The Minister of Finance did, in fact, take on a number of indicators to help decide how to spend money in the Canadian budget, but they were secret. They were only available to him because if it didn't look good, they didn't want people to know that they're not covering environment or social justice or whatever the issue was. But it was in the discretion of the finance minister whether or not those informations would be shared. The Wellbeing Measurement Act would have had the statisticians report directly to the Canadian people through Parliament, so it wouldn't have the filter of the government that always wants to look good so they can be reelected.
Yeah, and it seems, looking at Canada today, boy, it seems like the country is just as growth-obsessed as ever.
Our carbon emissions have grown 20% since we said we'd reduce them.
Good grief. But on the subject of alternative indicators, there's been some progress around the world, right?
Mm-hmm. Indeed. I'm just reading Ron Coleman's book, What Really Counts. He was working on the Genuine Progress Index for Nova Scotia. Was a lot of help in us setting up the bill that we put to Parliament, and also has spent, I guess, almost 20 years now working with the country of Bhutan on their gross national happiness work. It's an amazing book. It just came out this year. It's got as much information about the ideology of well-being measurement as anything I've seen. He really is the pioneer in the field, and anybody interested in that, this is the book that can give you an idea of what the possibilities are, and also how it can be derailed by bureaucrats who'd really rather not, put themselves out to come up with measures of things.
Wow, I'm glad to hear about that book. We'll put a link in the show notes, and I'll definitely have to get a copy.
Yeah, What Really Counts, the case for a sustainable and equitable economy.
All right, thanks. I noticed when I was Googling around to see how much action you'd gotten on More Fun, Less Stuff, I discovered that there was a book by Betsy Taylor called Action Kit, More Fun, Less Stuff, Starter Kit.
Cool. I'll write that down.
Okay, so you weren't familiar with that?
No, but I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah, check it out. I'll put a link in the show notes too. I haven't, seen the book, but apparently Betsy Taylor was a founder of the Center for a New American Dream, an organization that's now called New Dream, and it looks to me like they are kind of working on similar notions about, basically kind of redefining the American dream, because it certainly got hijacked, didn't it? Into more stuff.
Well, it always was a more stuff dream. That's always how, if you work hard, you'll be able to make it. And make it has always meant being a big house, a big car, and lots of stuff. That's what we're taught in school. The reason you get an education is so you can make more money and get more stuff. It's pervasive. It's, what this whole thing's about. It's what a caterpillar is about. A caterpillar spends its entire life collecting natural resources and growing. But at a certain point, it comes to enough, and that's where we're fuzzy. But the caterpillar, recognizes that that's as much stuff as it needs to collect, goes into the cocoon, and it comes out as a being that's beautiful, that lives lightly, just sips the nectar of flowers, and its purpose is the well-being of the next generation.
One of the questions that you've asked in your work is how to get there. I think I still got some of your cards that are labeled a question of direction. And lately, I've been kind of doing my own version of that, where I've been kind of proposing that, people are casting their vote. They're checking the box either for a bleak future or they're checking the box for a beautiful future. And so many of the decisions we make every day as individuals, but certainly as a society and certainly in government policy, are either taking us, down the road to ruin, or maybe in some cases taking us toward the potential for a beautiful future. But how do we get there? Because it seems like the culture hasn't evolved nearly fast enough for us to have much hope, Mike.
Yeah. Well, I'm not expecting there to be big policy moves, but if we just took the tax credit off of advertising, you can deduct the cost of advertising as far as it says, this is what we produce, this is where you can find it, this is how much it costs, this is what it does. That basic information is legitimate. That's a business expense. But once advertising gets into the sort of high frequency, hardcore selling that just, gets people to think they want it in spite of wanting it or not, then yeah, go ahead, but don't expect to write it off your taxes. Mm-hmm. Like advertising is an active propaganda machine that is just, constantly selling. And it's hard to imagine, going up against that. That said, the voluntary simplicity they used to call the movement, people just realizing that, yeah, if I, want less stuff, then I have more time for living and I can avoid this debt trap and stuff like that. That seems to be growing. It seems to have more and more people who just say, yeah, that's like, what was I thinking? I like to tell people I make most of my money by not wanting things. Like I don't make a lot of money. I'm a custom furniture maker. But, and I could do that work whenever I needed money, but mostly I didn't need money, right? I found a place that was inexpensive to live and raise my family, and good food particularly is not very expensive compared to processed stuff. And yeah, I wanted to work away at trying to communicate these things I'd learned from all the voluntary and nonprofit groups I'd talked with. So I just took the low cost lifestyle as a way to give myself the freedom to do the work I wanted to do.
So I think I just got like your top two list. One is these individual actions for people to, kind of get a new religion and stop worshiping stuff. And the other was advertising. Are those really, you think those are the top two things that need to happen?
Well, that's taking it from the, trying to deal with the problem side, which is good. But, just like look for what you can do with your life. How can you get your satisfaction from what's around you without involving stuff, right? That's coming from the other side of this divide between our tailspin consumerist debacle to this incredible potential that we have. We're so clever, humans are. And this is a really abundant planet in the end. So if we could just let ourselves solve the problems rather than sticking to this obsolete growth thing, the world will be wonderful. And if people could realize that possibility and then work back, how do we get here? We just reduce our consumption and increase our focus on living. And every time somebody says, no thanks, I'm not going to bother with the thing, and they go and do something with their life, that inclines us that way. And of course, talking with other people about it and writing and broadcasting and blogging and tweeting and, somehow the world has to understand that this possibility is there. We need to deal with the problems, yes, but if we could look at it from the side where we're basically liberated from the materialist cult, it's just easier to take. It is satisfying at the time, and we can work away at cleaning up the mess.
Yeah. I'll never forget when I was working on the film Growth Busters, there was a point in time where you were traveling across the U.S., or at least a part of the U.S. I think you had some speaking engagements, and I corralled you into coming to my town, and I lined up a speaking opportunity for you. And also, you were a guest in my home, and we filmed an interview with you for the film. It was really one of the more awesome, delightful adventures of filmmaking for me. Do you still do speaking?
Whenever I can. We've just discovered Zoom lately. I had a couple of things lined up last spring, and they got canceled with the COVID thing. And then one of the profs, it was a class at Algonquin College, after they got familiar with Zoom, the prof said, you want to do my class with Zoom. I was delighted to find out how much like actually being there and talking with the class it was. So I'm trying to, stir up opportunities. Of course, this could happen anywhere in the English-speaking world now, instead of just where I can get to by driving around. So, yeah, if anybody who's listening to this is interested in, the larger spectrum of stories that I tell to make this a little more understandable, and get in touch, and we'll see if we can line up a chance to talk with small groups are good, bigger, it doesn't really matter because it's a pleasure to be able to share the stories.
Yeah, it's pretty inexpensive, low carbon footprint. Doesn't take any of your time traveling, so it can really help you get the word out. And I got to say, you're at your best when I'm not getting in your way.
But you got to give me topics.
So if somebody wants to follow your work, figure out how they can help, and maybe line up a speaking engagement for you, what are the best ways for people to follow what you're doing and get in touch with you?
Well, the website is sustainwellbeing.net. My email's there, sustain5@web.ca. Get in touch, and we'll talk about it and see what we can line up.
And what else? Anything else that we want to ask people to do to help more fun, less stuff take off?
There's elder colleges and OLI something or other, which is basically at elder colleges in the States. And I've been putting together a proposal to do just one session thing with people that are there. And I would then, pitch to the grandparents, talk to your kids and your grandchildren about the possibilities. The first thing is that there's been a fundamental change in the relationship between people and the earth. It used to be that the earth was just so huge we couldn't grasp its size and we couldn't do anything that would affect it except in local areas. But with the expansion of our numbers and the power of our technology, we're now affecting almost everything on earth and we're causing serious problems. So clearly what we were doing when the earth was relatively gargantuan won't work now that we're overpowering it. So we need a fundamental change in how we manage ourselves. That's the basic challenge. That's the question of direction. Do we grow until we drop, or do we shift course and aim for sustainability? There's two laws that govern living things on the planet, and they didn't really apply to us while we were, on this enormous planet. One is the law of the minimum. What resource is going to get diminished to the point where there isn't enough of it to go around? Maybe it's going to be lithium. I understand there's lots of lithium, but we'll just pretend it was that, and we need it for batteries. We're only going to be able to make so many cars using lithium batteries until the availability of lithium has dropped to where we can't get it, right? And it may not be. It's probably the ability of the atmosphere to absorb carbon is the minimum that's going to stop human expansion. The law of tolerance is well illustrated with yeast in fruit juice. Like the yeast digests the sugar in the juice, and its byproduct is alcohol. And it continues to digest sugar and produce alcohol until the level of alcohol reaches about 14%. And yeast can't tolerate alcohol at 14%, and it dies. And that's why you don't find any naturally occurring alcohol at greater than 14%. If it's greater, it's been distilled or in some ways intensified. So those are basic laws that we need to accommodate. Buckminster Fuller put it very nicely in his operating manual for Spaceship Earth. He said that we need to be able to maintain, the material elements that we need for living within cycles. We always need to be able to keep them moving around so that we don't run out. We need energy. We've got a great star nearby. If we recognize those criteria and build our systems within them, then we can cruise the universe on Spaceship Earth for the indefinite future. Lots of stuff. Change begins with a vision. If you want to make a peanut butter sandwich, you first have to imagine it. And then you need bread, you need a knife, you need peanut butter, you need a cutting board. You imagine the things that you need, you bring the pieces together, and you go through the motions, and kazam, you've got a peanut butter sandwich. Well, we need a new sort of world. So we need to visualize how that can work. Like the nutrient cycles, most of what we live from is in the air. Carbon, oxygen, hydrogen. Those make up most of the substance of our bodies. And after that, the other elements can be maintained in cycles through the local soil. So you can assure through a cyclic approach to your local territory good quality food forever. Energy in housing and stuff like that. Like we've learned enough for building houses so that they capture heat when you need it, and they can keep the heat out when you don't need it, and ways of cooling that draw on the earth and we can make houses that take almost no energy to be comfortable. Education is free from an environmental perspective. It's knowledge and goodwill. We have as much of that as we're willing to share with each other. And healthcare is pretty much the same on the preventative level. We know what it takes to be healthy. If we can encourage each other to live in a healthy way, we can drop the healthcare costs immensely. So you can have a well-fed, comfortably housed, educated, and healthy population, and a really small portion of the energy and material that it takes to run your consumer lifestyle. So those are, key stories that we like to tell here. Of course, we talked about measuring well-being, which is, let's not just talk about how much money is being made. If you have a traffic accident outside your house, you'll see that there's, damage to the cars, and maybe people are hurt, are going to need medical care, and you're going to have to pay for some police time to check it out, and maybe lawyers. There's a whole lot of expenses in that accident that are all added to the gross domestic product. And it's crazy because this is not a good thing. Having lots of accidents is not the way to make your economy grow well. But GDP does that. So we need to be able to measure the social and the environmental actions and situations in society so we can see, oh, yeah, we're making more money, but we're making it because there's an arson problem and a lot of houses are burning down. Education, that's great. We're spending money on that. That's an increase in our well-being. So, we need to differentiate. We really need to open our eyes. It's like driving a bus looking only at the speedometer. How fast are we going? Well, look out ahead. See what's happening behind us, and what are the other things that we need to know in order to make our way through time on this planet with this civilization.
See, I just needed to get out of your way.
Yeah, well, I just pulled this sheet of paper out of my file there.
That's awesome. Yeah, I
blew the Buckminster Fuller thing, and it's funny I can't quite picture it. I'm a little bit bewildered by the fact that I don't know where that story starts. He wrote this book, An Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth, and he just the design criteria. The cyclic material use. You can't use things up in a way that you run out, and it certainly fits in with the limits of the minimum and of tolerance, and the good solar energy that we run on. If we respect the Earth's limitations and work with them, then we can cruise the universe for the indefinite future. It's easy to be a successful species on this planet, especially if we're as smart as we are. If only we can dodge the vested interests that take advantage of our communications media.
Yeah, that's so basic. It's just mind-boggling that we can't, as a culture, really get our heads wrapped around it in a better way. But on that subject of Spaceship Earth, did you ever see the short film I made called Spaceship Earth Passenger Safety Briefing?
I'm not sure.
I'll send you a link to that because I think that's some of my best work.
Yeah, it was a tremendously inspiring, book for me. It was one of the few that Small is Beautiful being the other one that really influenced me in my early days.
Yeah. I thought about Small is Beautiful when I was talking about how I think Life, Money, and Illusion is pretty timeless. I would put those books right next to each other on the must-have bookshelf for everybody around the world, really.
Yeah. There was one other topic that came up here that we haven't talked about yet, which is money. And where it comes from and how it's used, because right now money is created. People, it's not the coins and bills. They only make up maybe 4 or 5% of the amount of money that's in circulation. Most of it is created when people borrow it. And if you've got a business plan and you need $10,000 to set up your business, you go to the bank with your business plan, you show it to them, and it's brilliant. There's no question in the mind of the banker that you can make back the money they're going to lend plus the interest, right? So they don't go to the vault and get you depositors' money. They just write you a line of credit. They put $10,000 in your account with just some keystrokes. And every time you write a check or make a payment for materials or rent or labor or whatever you need for your business, the people receiving that money then go and spend that on whatever they want. And the people that they give it to can spend it what they want. And that's how the money goes into circulation. The trick is that when it comes time to pay back the loan, the bank only created the $10,000, but they want $11,000 back, or whatever the interest charge is. It's more than what they created.
Yeah.
So in order for there to be enough money to pay back the loan plus interest, there has to be more loans the next year. Every year, more loans have to be taken out in order to keep increasing the amount of money that's in circulation, or else people default and the businesses go bankrupt and people lose their homes, and all the hard times that happen in a recession happen because the lack of expansion means that people can't pay off the debts. There's not enough money in total to do that easily, and the thing crashes. So, if we had money that didn't have a debt burden to it, some cases, there's a wonderful example in a city in Austria after the Second World War. They were, I think it was the First World War, they were in the Depression as well, and they'd been destroyed by the war. So they were in really dire straits. And this one city decided that they would take a bunch of the federal money, put it in the bank, and then create a stamp script of an equal volume. So they're not accused of creating money, which of course they could do, but that's frowned on by central banks. So they had this stamp script. And the thing about that was that for it to stay valuable, you had to get a stamp on it every month or so. And that stamp cost you a small amount. So the longer you held on to it, the less it was worth. And, in a recession or a depression, what people are inclined to do is hold on to their money because they don't know what's happening. And because they're holding on to their money, they're not spending it. Other people aren't getting it, making any money. And that's the negative feedback loop that makes, depression so depressing. But in Wara, in this community, I think Wara was the name of the currency, because the money was worth less next month than it is now, like you just earned some money, you want to get your house painted or upgrade the tools in your factory or improve your land or whatever it is that you're doing. You want to do that now because you're going to get the most for your money. Yeah. And they found that the money was circulating, was being used in that town 14 times for each single time that the money was being used in other communities in the area, because people were holding on to it and not spending it. So in the midst of this depression, the town was painted, the roads were repaved, the forests were trimmed, the fields were upgraded, and all of this stuff, they were thriving. And it proves that it's not about the money. It's all about people being able to do things and being willing to trade with each other. Money gives us a way of keeping track of it so that, people don't take advantage of the situation. But, if we have skills and talents and ability and there's some basic resources around to work with, then we can do the work to take care of each other and to build this new world we need, on the goodwill managed by some form of currency that we can create.
But that loaning of money into existence creates this system that requires growth. So that's got to be, so I think you've wisely identified that as one of the things that absolutely has to change if we're going to get.
And one way possibly of dealing with it is for an amount equivalent to or slightly larger than the debt payments to be put into circulation by government through government projects to do good things for the community. And that would put the additional money in circulation to enable loans to be paid back without having to continuously expand everything.
Very interesting. Well, Mike, it's always fascinating to hear you talk and the tales you tell. You're a great communicator about this subject. So thank you for sharing your words of wisdom with us on this episode.
No, thanks for having me on. I'll look forward to seeing the podcast when it comes out.
We'll encourage our listeners to explore your work, and let's see if we can't get more fun, less stuff to take off. Thanks for listening to the Growth Busters podcast, where we discuss our society's addiction to growth, and we do our best to chart a sustainable course for human civilization. On a full planet, that means it's time we stop expanding the scale of the human enterprise. I'm talking about our numbers, our individual footprints, and the size of our economy. Share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget we work for tips. Please make a tax-deductible contribution to the project via the link in the show notes or at growthbusters.org. Until next time, think small.
Some may dream to pave mountains and streams, but not me. I'm a growth buster. Some they just want more, but don't know what it's for, but not me. I'm a growth buster. Don't want a solution at the cost of pollution. They think bigger is better at the cost of the weather. But no, not us. We are the growth busters. Calling, 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 calling. Call the growth busters.